fair number of these refugees were farmers who've farmed this particular land for generations and now face the threat not only of expropriation but also of direct violence. We had a chance to speak to them about many of these folks have experience with threatening invasions of their homes, their farms.
Out of the diverse groupings that we have in South Africa, we're the only country on the continent where the colonizers came to stay, and we have never driven them out of our country. So they are staying and they're making great progress. It's a fringe grouping that does not have a lot of support, that is anti-transformation and anti-change, that would actually prefer to see South Africa going back to apartheid.
As well, obviously, as several very vociferous South African politicians repeating things like kill the Boer, kill the Afrikaner, and these people have been living under a shadow of violence and a real lack of interest or success of the government in doing anything about this situation.
Guys, so President Ramaphosa, who is actually, I think he was currently attending the Africa CEO Forum, which actually had President of Rwanda, President Paul Kagame, as well as some notable leaders in Africa, has actually addressed this whole issue about the Afrikaners leaving his country, South Africa, for the US as refugees, which for me, many times when I think about it, it's in a way really strange how a president, could actually watch citizens of his country be uprooted from his country to another country. I know there are many issues around that whole, why you had to get to that. You see, I was listening to Dan Corder's video on the 142 race laws. I think he had about a 13-minute video thereabout on YouTube, which he tried to analyze all of the, racially based laws as had been argued by the Institute of Race Relations, and the index, with which most of the laws from the 1990s thereabout up to today in 2024 or 25 were actually now termed race-based law. There were 142 of them. And in that video, he was actually arguing that these laws are not racially based, or they are not race-based laws, because from the look of things, when you read the laws themselves, there's nothing really racial in the law. But when I did my own deeper search in most of the laws, I now slowly started to discover why some of those laws might have a racial tune to that. And the whole thing, in my own conclusion, I will be making a video on that anyway, lies with this whole thing with triple BEE. That would be my conclusion from the whole critical analysis, because I refuse to go along the lines of Dan Corder and his video, where he just blatantly said that those 142 laws are not race-based laws. All right, I had to really go down and try to think. I made many ChatGPT analysis and different kinds of analysis to really understand why the laws, when you read the laws, like the I think it was the National Procurement Act, or one of them that had to do with procurement services, and this probably would have to do with tenders. All right, at the end of the day, when you read the law, there's nothing really racial in the law anyway, but because of the institution of the triple BEE to address the historical injustices of the disadvantaged groups in South Africa, this is where I see a racial tonality to most of these laws, which in themselves, I think the motives of triple BEE weren't really bad in themselves, all right? Because it was a way to just simply justify the fact that these guys were actually disadvantaged in the history, and to bring them into the main economy and have them flourish in terms of business so that there could be healthy cooperation. But a major critique of BEE has been the fact that it has only enriching the few black elites, and the wider South Africans still remain poor. Today we have an unemployment rate going now. I used to say it was 33.3%, but now in South Africa it's gone to 43%. And for me, I was really surprised when I tried, because I used to complain in Nigeria. Even today, Nigerians still complain that there are no jobs in the country. People are leaving for, to overseas for better jobs and all that. And when I looked at the unemployment rate, it was still less than I think 7%. But we have a South Africa with 60 million. Nigerians now, we are about 300 and something, 400 million and above, even almost 450 million people in South Africa is argued to be 60 million. And in 60 million, we have a 42% unemployment rate. If you add the youth percentages, according to, I think, a COSATU lead at some point, it goes to 77 there, so the 70s. All right. So we're having, it's a really dire situation in South Africa. And to lose the talents that could probably, you know, I think most of these guys who are leaving, there's something about the whites. I've lived with whites a lot in Sweden, in Finland, in the Scandinavians anyway. And there's something about the, even Britain, most of the times when I was visiting Britain a lot. And one thing I understand about the white is this knack for business. I don't know how it comes, but you know, there are really some fine business people who have a business mind. You see, business is a different kind of mentality that you have to, in a way, think backwards from how you've been conditioned. That's why I wasn't when I started to understand business, even running this YouTube channel alone, sometimes I just want to give up some days. But when I understand the logic of running a business as compared to having a job, all right, I see why many of the greats we have today, Mark Zuckerberg, the guy who owns Virgin Atlantic in the UK, I don't remember his name. He pulled out of Nigeria at some point, but most of these guys had to drop out of school because the logic of creating businesses goes against the educational system which educates or programs us for a job. All right, so to lose this kind of people with this kind of capacity in South Africa, I know many people have actually given excuses that, you know, they begin to form kind of like a sect or a cult, which is difficult to break through, especially for the black disadvantaged person who hasn't gotten education for from the times of apartheid and now into the modern economy. They are uneducated, and to break into that place without any vocational training, it's really guarded. And that's why I think now they introduced this Employment Equity Amendments Act, which is now shaking the whole country. But at the end of the day, I feel really heavy that South Africa had to lose these people, and more are still going. I think I was even listening to some guy today who speaks about how the conditions for what it means to be an Afrikaner actually even brings a sort of like a minority tonality to that. So probably South Africa might even be losing some colors and some Indians at some point who are able to prove that they've witnessed some kind of trauma or some kind of attack, and probably are also threatened by this whole expropriation without compensation. So it's just many times as a president, maybe I think I might feel embarrassed, because to have my own citizens being uprooted by another country when there's no really physical war going on in my own country, but yet my citizens are being termed refugees. I don't know how that sounds, bro. It sounds somehow to my ears. But anyway, President Ramaphosa replied to that question. It was really raised in this business leaders forum, and I think this guy I used to watch, I think he's a CNN correspondent. He asks really intelligent questions. The way he framed the question probably might have taken the President Ramaphosa aback, but I think it's worth listening and watching how President Ramaphosa articulates his call with President Donald Trump, how he reasoned with President Donald Trump that, you know, these people might not be persecuted and all of that, but still at the end of the whole ramblings and all that, President Trump still came to this conclusion that South Africa is not interested or wasn't interested in protecting this portion of its citizens, and as a result of that, they had to swing in to protect them. It doesn't sound, I don't know, there's a way, I don't know about you guys, but let's quickly listen to this US Secretary explain President Donald Trump's position in why he had to go through this route. And then you will now watch President Ramaphosa's response to President Trump's decision to uproot South Africans who are Afrikaners from their home country, South Africa, while he's the sitting president, because Trump sees them as what he calls refugees. Share your thoughts in the comments.
Hi, thank you for your time. What are some examples of racial discrimination or attacks that initially caught the eye of the Trump administration, and is there a pathway to American citizenship for these refugees?
Sure. Well, thank you for that question. I think if you look at the executive order that the president issued back on February 7th of this year, it talks about the terrible expropriation act that was enacted last year in South Africa that allows for the expropriation without compensation of farmland. A fair number of these refugees were farmers who've farmed this particular land for generations and now face the threat not only of expropriation but also of direct violence. We had a chance to speak to them about many of these folks have experience with threatening invasions of their homes, their farms, and a real lack of interest or success of the government in doing anything about this situation, as well, obviously, as several very vociferous South African politicians repeating things like kill the Boer, kill the Afrikaner, and these people have been living under a shadow of violence and terror for some time now. Thank you.
BBC.
I just wanted to know, there
I can't hear you that well, sorry.
from the BBC. There are many people who fit the criteria of seeking help, who are fleeing persecution, Afghans for example, and they live in a country run by the Taliban. But they're being denied refugee status. So I'm wondering, why has such an exception been made for the Afrikaners, especially when the South African government says they're not in danger? And are you going to open up the refugee settlement program for others?
Thank you for that question. I think you may recall that on the president's first day in office, on January 20th of this year, he issued an executive order that paused U.S. refugee programs that had been going at record levels under the prior administration and had brought in people that we were not sure had been carefully vetted for national security issues, and put a pause on the refugee admission program in general. That pause, of course, was subject from the very beginning to exceptions where it was determined that this would be in the interest of the
But I would be committing journalistic malpractice if I don't ask President Ramaphosa this. As we speak, 49 white Afrikaner refugees are on their way to the United States. They will be received by the government of President Trump. What is your reaction to this?
Well, we've raised our own concern because those people who are being enticed to go to the United States do not fit the definition of a refugee. A refugee is someone who has to leave their country out of fear of political persecution, religious persecution, or economic persecution. And
that's what the United States says they're undergoing in South Africa. That's why they've opened the door for them.
Yes, and they don't fit that bill. They don't fit that description. And I had a conversation with President Trump on the phone, and he said, what's happening down there? And I said, President, what you've been told by those people who are opposed to transformation back home in South Africa is not true. And I added to him, I said, we were well taught by Nelson Mandela and other iconic leaders like Oliver Tambo on how to continue to build a united nation out of the diverse groupings that we have in South Africa. We're the only country on the continent where the colonizers came to stay, and we have never driven them out of our country. So they are staying, and they're making great progress. It's a fringe grouping that does not have a lot of support. that is anti-transformation and anti-change, that would actually prefer to see South Africa going back to apartheid type of policies. And I said to him, I would never do that. I learned at the feet of Nelson Mandela, and we intend to proceed with the implementation of our constitutional architecture. And I thought in my conversation with him early in the morning at 4 o'clock South African time, he understood that. And I said, I'd like to come and meet him so that we can discuss this matter further. So those people who have fled are not being persecuted, they are not being hounded, they are not being treated badly, and they are leaving ostensibly because they don't want to embrace the changes that are taking place in our country in accordance with our constitution. So we think that the American government has got the wrong end of the stick here, but we'll continue talking to them.
So a face-to-face meeting is coming up. Is Elon Musk invited when you have that face-to-face meeting?
Well, I don't know. They will determine whether Elon Musk is part of it or not. I will go with my own South African delegation.
Your Excellency, thank you so much, Your Excellencies.